The White House buzzed with anticipation on a crisp spring morning as President Donald Trump hosted a special Rose Garden event to honor outstanding military personnel. Among them was Emily Turner, a quiet 28-year-old Air Force nurse known not for fame but for her tireless care of wounded soldiers during multiple combat tours. Unlike the high-ranking officers around her, Emily shied away from the spotlight. But when Trump noticed her calm, humble presence, he sensed there was more to her story than the medals she wore. As applause filled the Rose Garden, President Trump quietly made a mental note. He wanted to know more about the modest nurse who carried the weight of war without fanfare. While speeches continued, Emily Turner stayed reserved, her thoughts drifting to the wounded soldiers she had once fought to save in distant combat zones. Those memories, raw and painful, weren't ones she often shared. In chaos, she was the calm. In darkness, the comfort. Her quiet strength earned deep respect from colleagues, but Emily never sought recognition. Watching her, Trump felt a growing curiosity and respect for the nurse who served with such silent courage. There was something deeper in Emily, a quiet story of sacrifice and love that deserved recognition. President Trump decided to speak with her after the ceremony, curious to know the woman behind the uniform. As the crowd mingled and reporters buzzed, he approached her with a warm handshake. "Thank you for your service, Emily. I've heard incredible things about your dedication," he said. Emily smiled politely, her eyes reflecting a hint of unease. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. President," she replied softly, clearly not used to the spotlight. Trump saw her humility, but also the strength she carried. "If you or your fellow nurses ever need anything, let me know," he said sincerely. "Our military families deserve the best." Emily nodded, grateful for the kind words, but deep down she wasn't sure she could ever ask for help, especially when her own struggles stayed hidden. That night, in her quiet apartment, she sat, alone, staring at an old photo on her bedside table. It was her younger brother Michael, proudly smiling in his Air Force uniform. He had been her reason to serve, her hero. But the war had changed him. Since coming home, Michael had battled invisible wounds, PTSD weighing down his once bright spirit. Emily carried the pain silently, trying to stay strong for him while fighting her own emotional battles. She was his anchor, but at times she felt herself drifting too. The quiet nurse who had spent years caring for others was now fighting a battle of her own. She longed to heal both her brother and herself before the weight of unspoken pain became too much. The next morning, Emily received an unexpected call from her commanding officer. She was being invited to a meeting with a White House aide. It was a rare and surprising request. President Trump wanted to hear directly from military nurses about the real challenges they faced, those who worked quietly and tirelessly behind the scenes. Nervous but determined, Emily prepared to speak honestly, knowing this was her chance to stand up for the silent heroes of war and to shine a light on the emotional toll and the urgent need for stronger support for veterans and their families. Though she had always been quiet, Emily felt a new sense of purpose. This was her moment to speak up for those who were so often overlooked. In the Oval Office, surrounded by aides and advisors, she took a steady breath and began. She spoke of the emotional toll of caring for wounded soldiers in the harshest conditions, the gay race to save lives while holding the hands of the dying. She shared the hidden pain of those returning home with invisible wounds, including her own brother. Emily pointed out the gaps in mental health care and the lack of support for veterans. President Trump listened closely, his usual boldness replaced by sincere focus. "Emily, you've given me a perspective I hadn't fully understood," he said, clearly moved. He admitted quietly, and for the first time Emily felt her voice truly mattered. The president's willingness to listen gave her hope, not just for herself but for every service member and family struggling in silence. In the following days, Emily returned to her hospital duties, unaware that her words had sparked action at the highest level. Behind the scenes, President Trump and his team began shaping a new initiative to improve mental health care and support for veterans and military families. News of the potential policy shift began to spread, drawing media attention. Still, Emily stayed focused on her work. unsure if her story could lead to real change. But deep down, the president's promise had lit a quiet flame of hope. Maybe this time the silent sacrifices would finally be seen and heard. That evening, Emily visited her brother Michael, who had become increasingly withdrawn. The toll of war showed in his haunted eyes and quiet demeanor. Sitting beside him on their worn couch, Emily gently took his hand. "I'm fighting for you, Michael," she whispered, "for all of us who struggle when the world looks away." Tears filled her eyes as Michael squeezed her hand weakly. Her heart ached for him, but it also strengthened her resolve. The president's promises meant nothing without real action and true support. She was determined to be the bridge that turned words into healing for families like theirs. It would be a long road, but she refused to give up. Soon, Trump's team announced a comprehensive initiative to boost mental health resources for veterans and their families, more funding, easier access to care, and new community support programs. Emily was invited to speak at the unveiling ceremony, a daunting honor. Standing at the podium, she took a deep breath. Her voice trembled at first, but soon grew strong and clear as she shared the hidden sacrifices behind the medals, the silent suffering of soldiers and caregivers alike. Her honest words moved many, and the room fell into a respectful hush. Emily's story had shifted from a private struggle to a powerful call for change, striking a chord with many. Her story quickly spread across social media and news outlets, with headlines praising the quiet nurse whose bravery sparked presidential action. Veterans and military families shared their own stories, finally feeling seen and supported after years of silence. Trump publicly praised Emily, calling her a true hero who embodied the spirit of service. For Emily, the recognition was humbling. She never sought fame, but understood the power of her voice to inspire. The attention brought hope to those long forgotten and renewed commitment to supporting all who serve. Emily realized her story was just the beginning. Emily realized that sometimes the quietest people make the biggest impact. Despite the public praise, her daily life remained tough. Long hours, emotional exhaustion, and the weight of loss still weighed on her. But now, she carried a new kind of strength, knowing her work was part of a larger movement for change. Policies were shifting, resources growing, and the conversation around veterans' mental health was finally open. Emily found comfort in a growing community of caregivers and advocates. Though the struggle wasn't over, she felt less alone. Her quiet courage had sparked compassion and action, proving even the smallest voice can create real change. One afternoon, a reporter asked Emily about the moment she met President Trump. When asked about meeting Trump, Emily smiled thoughtfully and said, "I never expected my quiet work to reach so far. It wasn't about politics or headlines. It was about the people behind the uniform." She shared how her brother's struggles and the needs of veterans drove her to speak up. "Sometimes the loudest voices are those who listen and care the most," she said softly. Her interview touched many, reminding everyone that true heroism often comes from humility and empathy. Emily's story challenged ideas about strength and leadership, showing that vulnerability can be a powerful force. Months passed, and Emily balanced her demanding nursing job with advocacy. She worked with veteran groups to design programs focused on healing and family support, traveled to hospitals and bases, and encouraged others to share their stories. Her quiet determination inspired many silenced by trauma. Meanwhile, Trump closely followed the progress, often pointing to Emily's story as a key moment that shifted his administration's approach to military care. Their unlikely partnership became a powerful symbol of hope, connecting politics with personal stories. Emily understood that real change took persistence and teamwork, and she was ready to keep fighting. One evening, after a long day, Michael surprised her with a visit. For the first time in months, he smiled, a fragile but genuine sign of hope. "You were right," he said softly. "I'm starting to feel like I'm not alone." Emily held him tightly, tears streaming down her face. Their shared pain was beginning to heal, strengthened by new support programs and the promise of real change. She felt deep gratitude for the president's willingness to listen, for the strength of military families, and for the resilience that can grow even in the darkest times. She knew the journey wasn't over, but this moment felt like a true victory. As her story gained public attention, Emily was invited to speak at schools, conferences, and community events. She used these opportunities to promote compassion and understanding for veterans' mental health. Her message was clear and powerful. Behind every uniform is a person with fears, dreams, and struggles. Emily's honesty connected deeply with audiences of all ages, inspiring many to volunteer, offer support, or simply listen to veterans in their own communities. Her journey proved that real change starts with empathy, and even the quietest voices can ignite a movement. Back at the hospital, Emily still faced challenges. Bureaucracy and limited resources often slowed care. But now, she felt stronger and ready to push for improvements and hold leaders accountable. Emily brought together a coalition of nurses and veterans to share their experiences directly with policymakers, making sure the voices from the front lines shaped important decisions. Her leadership grew naturally, quiet but strong, compassionate yet determined. Motivated by her promise to Michael and others like him, she turned pain into purpose, showing that hope can grow even from the deepest wounds. One day, Trump invited Emily back to the White House for a private meeting. He thanked her for her dedication and announced plans to expand funding for mental health programs across the country. "Emily, you've shown us what true service means," he said sincerely. "Your story changed hearts and minds. We're not finished yet." Emily felt a deep sense of pride and responsibility. The road ahead was long, but with leaders who listened and communities ready to support, real healing was within reach. Her quiet courage had sparked a powerful movement for change nationwide. As Emily stepped out of the Oval Office, she reflected on her journey, from a quiet nurse at a simple ceremony to a powerful advocate for change. All it took was someone willing to listen. Her story had grown beyond pain and sacrifice. It was now one of hope, healing, and a brighter future for veterans and their families. Though her brother's struggles were far from over, there was now light in the darkness, giving her the strength to keep fighting. News outlets continued to share her story, showing how a humble nurse inspired major improvements in veteran care. Emily's honesty and humility touched hearts around the world, proving that heroes don't always wear medals or seek attention. Her journey became a powerful example of empathy, resilience, and the courage to speak up. The nation watched as a simple promise made in the Rose Garden sparked a movement of compassion. Emily's story no longer belonged to just her, it belonged to every soldier, nurse, and family affected by war. In a heartfelt interview months later, she said softly, "I never imagined my quiet work would lead to this, but I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is listen, and then act with compassion." Her promise to her brother and fellow veterans had become a promise to the whole nation. The story of the quiet Air Force nurse and the president who listened became a beacon of hope, reminding us all that even in silence, there is strength, and in kindness, true leadership.